Perciò torneremo nel futuro e impediremo a Biff di rubare la macchina del tempo.
Non possiamo, perché se andiamo nel futuro da questo punto del tempo, sarebbe nel futuro di questa realtà, nella quale Biff è corrotto, potente e sposato con tua madre, e dove tutto questo è successo a me. No. La nostra unica possibilità di riparare il presente è nel passato, nel punto dove la linea del tempo ha deviato su questa tangente. Per poter rimettere l'universo come lo ricordiamo e tornare alla nostra realtà, dobbiamo scoprire la data esatta e le precise circostanze di quando, come e dove il giovane Biff è riuscito a mettere le sue mani sopra quell'almanacco.
More than a half-century ago, Russian-born novelist and philosopher Ayn Rand determined that her adopted homeland had lost touch with the core values that had fueled America's rise to preeminence on the planet, and she saw trouble ahead.
The plot of Atlas Shrugged resonates with what's going on today.
The book was written in '57, but the basic conflicts, the conflict between collectivism and individualism, between altruism and self-interest, between capitalism and statism. All those conflicts still exist today.
There's so much going on politically these days that can just be taken right out of the pages of the book.
A devastated economy caused by government intervention, leading to more and more and more government intervention, which makes it worse and worse and worse.
Rand depicted what she believed were the causes and effects of this dilemma in an epic novel she called Atlas Shrugged.
It basically challenges 2,000 years of philosophy.
Everybody practically came out against it. The left, the right, the middle, they were all against it.
That really can set some people off.
This is Mike Wallace with another television portrait from our gallery of colorful people. Throughout the United States, small pockets of intellectuals have become involved in a new and unusual philosophy which would seem to strike at the very roots of our society. The fountainhead of this philosophy is a novelist, Ayn Rand, whose two major works, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, have been bestsellers. We'll try to find out more about her revolutionary creed and about Miss Rand herself in just a moment. And now to our story. Down through history, various political and philosophical movements have sprung up, but most of them have died. Some, however, like democracy or communism, take hold and affect the entire world. Here in the United States, perhaps the most challenging and unusual new philosophy has been forged by a novelist, Ayn Rand. Miss Rand's point of view is still comparatively unknown in America, but if it ever did take hold, it would revolutionize our lives. And Ayn, to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize, I know this is difficult, can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute, that man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it, and that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality which has so far been believed impossible, namely a morality not based on faith.
On faith?
Not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason. A morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
All right, all right.
Now, may I define what my morality is?
All right.
Because this is merely an introduction. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness, and that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him, that each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
May I interrupt now?
You may.
Because you put this philosophy to work in your novel Atlas Shrugged.
That's right.
You demonstrate it in human terms in your novel Atlas Shrugged. And let me start by quoting from a review of this novel Atlas Shrugged that appeared in Newsweek. It said that you are out to destroy almost every edifice in the contemporary American way of life, our Judeo-Christian religion, our modified government-regulated capitalism, our rule by the majority will. Other reviews have said that you scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes, I agree with the facts, but not the estimate of this criticism. Namely, if I am challenging the base of all these institutions, I'm challenging the moral code of altruism, the precept that man's moral duty is to live for others, that man must sacrifice himself to others, which is the present-day morality.
What do you mean by sacrifice himself for others? We're getting to the point.
One moment. Since I'm challenging the base, I necessarily would challenge the institutions you named, which are a result of that morality.
All right.
And now what is self-sacrifice?
Yes, what is self-sacrifice? You say that you do not like the altruism by which we live. You like a certain kind of Ayn Randist selfishness.
I would say that I don't like is too weak a word. I consider it evil. And self-sacrifice is the precept that man needs to serve others in order to justify his existence, that his moral duty is to serve others. That is what most people believe today.
Well, yes, we're taught to feel concerned for our fellow man, to feel responsible for his welfare, to feel that we are, as religious people might put it, children under God and responsible one for the other. Now, why do you rebel? What's wrong with this philosophy?
But that is what, in fact, makes man a sacrificial animal. That man must work for others, concern himself with others, or be responsible for them. That is the role of a sacrificial object. I say that man is entitled to his own happiness and that he must achieve it himself, but that he cannot demand that others give up their lives to make him happy. And nor should he wish to sacrifice himself for the happiness of others. I hold that man should have self-esteem.
And cannot man have self-esteem if he loves his fellow man? What's wrong with loving your fellow man? Christ, every important moral leader in man's history, has taught us that we should love one another. Why, then, is this kind of love, in your mind, immoral?
It is immoral if it is a love placed above oneself. It is more than immoral, it's impossible. Because when you are asked to love everybody indiscriminately, that is, to love people without any standard, to love them regardless of the fact of whether they have any value or virtue, you are asked to love nobody.
But in a sense, in your book, you talk about love as if it were a business deal of some kind. Isn't the essence of love that it is above self-interest?
Well, let me make it concrete for you. What would it mean to have love above self-interest? It would mean, for instance, that a husband would tell his wife, if he were moral, according to the conventional morality, that I am marrying you just for your own sake. I have no personal interest in it, but I am so unselfish that I am marrying you only for your own good.
Well, should husbands and wives
would
tally
any woman
up?
Like that?
Should husbands and wives tally up at the end of the day and say, well, now, wait a minute. I love her if she's done enough for me today, or she loves me if I have properly performed my functions?
No, you misunderstood me. That is not how love should be treated. I agree with you that it should be treated like a business deal, but every business has to have its own terms and its own kind of currency. And in love, the currency is virtue. You love people not for what you do for them or what they do for you. You love them for the values, the virtues which they have achieved in their own character. You don't love causelessly. You don't love everybody indiscriminately. You love only those who deserve it.
And then if a man is weak or a woman is weak, then he is beyond love?
He certainly does not deserve it. He certainly is beyond. He can always correct it. Man has free will. If a man wants love, he should correct his weaknesses or his flaws, and he may deserve it. But he cannot expect the unearned, neither in love nor in money, neither in matter nor spirit.
You have lived in our world, and you recognize the fallibility of human beings. There are very few of us, then, in this world, by your standards, who are worthy of love.
Unfortunately, yes, very few. But it is open to everybody to make themselves worthy of it, and that is all that my morality offers them.
If they will
a way to make themselves worthy of love, although that's not the primary motive.
Let's move ahead. How does your philosophy translate itself into the world of politics? Now, one of the principal achievements of this country in the past 20 years particularly, I think most people agree, is the gradual growth of social protective legislation based on the principle that we are our brother's keepers. How do you feel about the political trends of the United States, the Western world?
The way everybody feels, except more consciously. I feel that it is terrible, that you see destruction all around you, and that you are moving toward disaster until and unless all those welfare state conceptions have been reversed and rejected. It is precisely these trends which are bringing the world to disaster, because we are now moving towards complete collectivism or socialism, a system under which everybody is enslaved to everybody. And we are moving that way only because of our altruist morality.
Yes, but you say everybody is enslaved to everybody, yet this came about democratically, Ayn. Free people in a free country voted for this kind of government, wanted this kind of legislation. Do you object to the democratic process?
I object to the idea that people have the right to vote on everything. The traditional American system was a system based on the idea that majority will prevailed only in public or political affairs, and that it was limited by inalienable individual rights. Therefore, I do not believe that a majority can vote a man's life or property or freedom away from him. Therefore, I do not believe that if a majority votes on any issue, that this makes the issue right. It doesn't.
All right. Then how do we arrive at action? How should we arrive at action?
By voluntary consent, voluntary cooperation of free men, unforced.
And how do our leaders arrive? How do we arrive at our leadership? Who elects? Who appoints?
The whole people elects. There is nothing wrong with the democratic process in politics. We arrive at it the way we arrived by the American Constitution as it used to be. By the constitutional process as we had it, people elect officials, but the powers of those officials, the powers of government, are strictly limited. They will have no right to initiate force or compulsion against any citizen except a criminal. Those who have initiated force will be punished by force, and that is the only proper function of government. What we would not permit is the government to initiate force against people who have hurt no one, who have not forced anyone. We would not give the government or the majority or any minority the right to take the life or the property of others. That was the original American system.
When you say take the property of others, I imagine that you're talking now about taxes.
Yes, I am.
And you believe that there should be no right by the government to tax. You believe that there should be no such thing as welfare legislation, unemployment compensation, regulation during times of stress, certain kinds of rent controls and things like that.
That's right. I'm opposed to all forms of control. I am for an absolute, laissez-faire, free, unregulated economy. Let me put it briefly. I'm for the separation of state and economics, just as we had separation of state and church, which led to peaceful coexistence among different religions after a period of religious wars. So the same applies to economics. If you separate the government from economics, if you do not regulate production and trade, you will have peaceful cooperation and harmony and justice among men.
You are certainly enough of a political scientist to know that certain movements spring up in reaction to other movements. The labor movement, for instance, certain social welfare legislation. This did not spring full-blown from somebody's head, out of a vacuum. This was a reaction to certain abuses that were going on. Isn't that true, Ayn?
Not always. It actually sprang up from the same source as the abuses. If by abuses you mean the legislation, which originally had been established to help industrialists, which was already a breach of complete free enterprise. If then, in reaction, labor leaders get together to initiate legislation to help labor, that is only acting on the same principle, namely, all parties agreeing that it is proper for the state to legislate in favor of one economic group or another.
But
what I'm saying is that nobody should have the right, neither employers nor employees, to use state compulsion and force.
But when you advocate completely unregulated economic life in which every man works for his own profit, you are asking, in a sense, for a devil-take-the-hindmost, dog-eat-dog society, and one of the main reasons for the growth of government controls was to fight the robber barons, to fight laissez-faire, in which the very people whom you admire the most, Ayn, the hard-headed industrialists, the successful men, perverted the use of their power. Is that not true?
No, it isn't.
Oh.
This country was made not by robber barons, but by independent men, by industrialists who succeeded on sheer ability.
And
By ability, I mean without political force, help, or compulsion. But at the same time, there were men, industrialists, who did use government power as a club to help them against competitors. They were the original collectivists. Today, the liberals believe that that same compulsion should be used against the industrialists for the sake of workers. But the basic principle there is, should there be any compulsion? And the regulations are creating robber barons. They are creating capitalists with government help, which is the worst of all economic phenomena.
I think that you will agree with me when I say that you do not have a good deal of respect for the society in which you and I currently live. You think that we're going downhill fairly fast. Now, I would like you to think about this question, and you'll have a minute intermission to ponder it and then come back and answer it. Do you predict dictatorship and economic disaster for the United States if we continue on our present course? Do you? And we'll get Ayn Rand's answer in just a moment. And now back to our story. All right, Ayn Rand, what I'd like to know is this. Since you describe it as happening in your novel Atlas Shrugged, do you actually predict dictatorship and economic disaster for the United States?
If the present collectivist trend continues, if the present anti-reason philosophy continues, yes, that is the way the country is going. But I do not believe in historical determinism, and I do not believe that people have to go that way. Men have the free will to choose and to think. If they change their thinking, we do not have to go into dictatorship.
Yes, but how can you expect to reverse this trend when, as we've said, the country is run by majority rule through ballot, and that majority seems to prefer to vote for this modified welfare state?
Oh, I don't believe that. You know as well as I do that the majority today has no choice.
What do you mean?
The majority has never been offered a choice between controls and freedom.
How do you account for the fact that an almost overwhelming majority of the people who are regarded as our leading intellectuals and our leading industrialists, the men whom you seem to admire the most, the men with the muscle and the money, favor the modified capitalism that we have today?
Because it is an intellectual issue. Since they all believe in collectivism, they do favor it. But the majority of the people has never been given a choice. You know that both parties today are for socialism, in effect, for controls, and there is no party. There are no voices to offer an actual pro-capitalist, laissez-faire economic freedom and individualism. That is what this country needs today.
Isn't it possible that we all believe in it because we are all basically lonely people and we all understand that we are basically our brother's keepers?
You couldn't say that you really understand it because there is no way in which you could justify it. Nobody has ever given a reason why men should be their brother's keepers, and you've had every example, and you see the examples around you of men perishing by the attempt to be their brother's keepers.
You have no faith in anything?
Faith?
Only
no.
in your mind?
That is not faith, that is a conviction.
If Rand was here today, she would point to almost anything that's going on in government right now and say, I told you so.
Migliaia d'anni fa un uomo riuscì a scoprire il segreto del fuoco. Forse lo bruciarono con quel legno che gli aveva insegnato ad accendere, ma lasciò all'umanità un dono insperato e con esso liberò dal buio la terra. Durante i secoli, altri uomini mossero i primi passi sulle vie nuove, animati soltanto dalla loro intuizione. I grandi creatori, i pensatori, gli artisti, gli scienziati, gli inventori rimasero soli contro gli uomini del loro tempo. Ogni nuova idea era ostacolata, ogni invenzione bandita, ma ciascuno di loro andò avanti, lottò, soffrì e pagò, ma vinse. Non era mosso dal desiderio di piacere alla folla. La folla odiava il dono, era offerto, ma lui cercava la verità. Suo scopo era solo la sua opera. La sua opera, non chi ne usava. La sua creazione, non i benefici che gli altri ne traevano. La creazione che dava forma alla sua verità. Però la sua verità la metteva sopra e contro tutti gli altri. Andò avanti, sia che gli altri volessero seguirlo o no. Solo con la sua integrità per sola bandiera. Non servì niente e nessuno. Visse solo per sé. E solo vivendo per sé poté realizzare le opere che formano la gloria dell'umanità. È così che è avvenuta ogni conquista. L'uomo è nato inerme, ha un'unica arma, la sua mente. Senza di essa non potrebbe sopravvivere. Ma la mente è un attributo dell'individuo, non c'è e non si può concepire una specie di cervello collettivo. L'uomo che pensa di dire da sé. Come può lavorare se è sottoposto a costrizioni di ogni genere? È impossibile subordinarlo a bisogni, opinioni o desideri di altri. Nessuno ha il diritto di sacrificarlo. Chi crea si basa sul proprio giudizio. Il parassita segue l'opinione degli altri. Chi crea pensa, il parassita copia. Chi crea produce, il parassita ruba. Chi crea tende alla conquista della natura, il parassita alla conquista degli uomini. A chi crea va data indipendenza, egli non comanda e non serve nessuno. Fra lui e gli altri c'è un libero scambio, una libera scelta. Il parassita cerca il potere e tenta di livellare gli uomini in un'azione comune, una comune schiavitù. E pretende che l'uomo debba essere uno strumento ad uso degli altri. Debba pensare come pensano gli altri, agire come gli altri, che debba annullarsi in una servitù senza gioia. Guardate la storia. Ogni conquista, ogni bene che possediamo deriva dall'opera indipendente di una mente indipendente. Ogni barbarie o decadenza nasce dal tentativo di fare degli uomini automi senza anima, senza cervello, senza diritti personali, volontà, speranza, dignità. È un antico conflitto. Oggi ha un altro nome: l'individuale contro il collettivo. Il nostro paese, che è fra i più nobili della storia degli uomini, si fondò sul principio dell'individualismo, ossia dei diritti inalienabili dell'uomo. Era un paese dove l'uomo era libero di cercare la sua felicità, di guadagnare e produrre non angustiato dalla rinunzia, di prosperare, non di languire, libero di possedere un bene inestimabile, il senso del suo valore personale e la più alta delle virtù, il suo amor proprio. Questo è ciò che i collettivisti vi chiedono di distruggere, come già altrove è stato distrutto.